It's 1651, and you're sailing across the channel in a Dutch ship. Life is good. You're not fighting the Spanish, French, or Portuguese. The Mediterranean is calm, and the seas are placid. But then, out of the blue, a royalist privateer attacks your ship. They plunder your cargo, and you barely escape with your life. So you tell the Dutch government, and they declare war on the privateer's base of operations, the Isles of Scilly, off the coast of Cornwall in the United Kingdom. And just like that, the Dutch are at war with a tiny archipelago in the middle of nowhere. In fact, the Netherlands and the Isles of Scilly have been at war for 335 years. That's because, while the war was never forgotten, it was effectively ignored for centuries until 1985, when a historian stumbled across the conflict. So here's the story of the world's most bizarre war. A war that lasted for over 3 centuries and resulted in 0 casualties. In 1651, the English Civil War was raging, and the westernmost tip of the Duchy of Cornwall, known as the Isles of Scilly, was held by royalist forces hostile to the Dutch. The islands would allow privateers to attack Dutch ships carrying supplies to England, and privateering was basically legal piracy. Privateers were given letters of marque by the government, which allowed them to attack enemy ships and keep the cargo. The Dutch government grew tired of these attacks, and in 1652 declared war on the Isle of Scilly. The Dutch navy blockaded the islands and bombarded them with cannons. But this didn't really do much. There were only around 1,000 people living there. The islands were basically just a bunch of rocks, and the royalists didn't take them seriously. But why did the Dutch declare war over such a small and remote set of islands? Well, the reason was shipping. The Isles of Scilly were a hub for privateers attacking merchant ships, and the Dutch had valuable cargo to protect. On paper, the war between the Netherlands and the Isles of Scilly was never finished. No peace treaty was ever signed. But in reality, no one paid much attention to it. As the centuries passed, no battles were fought, no skirmishes occurred, and not a single person was killed or injured as a result of the war. For all intents and purposes, the war was over the moment it started. But the paperwork for it remained, quietly existing in Dutch archives. In 1985, British historian Roy Duncan was researching the history of the Isles of Scilly and came across the old declaration of war. He sent a copy of it to the Dutch embassy in London and asked if they knew about it. They were as surprised as he was and asked him to come to the Netherlands to help research it. Together, they discovered that the war had indeed been completely forgotten. Neither country had ever kept records of it. In 1986, the Dutch ambassador to the UK, Reinhard Koper, sailed to the Isles of Scilly with a small delegation and signed a peace treaty with the local council. The ceremony was treated as a bit of a joke. The local newspaper ran the headline, "Dutch End 334-year-old War with Island Garrison Peace Treaty." The story made national news in both Britain and the Netherlands. It turned out that while the war was forgotten, people on both sides had fond memories of it. The Dutch ambassador joked that the war was a burden on his country's economy, costing the Dutch dearly in the form of lost shipping. Meanwhile, the people on the Isles of Scilly were proud of their island's martial past, and the Dutch blockade had inadvertently protected them from raids by French privateers. Today, the story is remembered as a quirky example of how 2 countries can go to war over obscure reasons, and how sometimes it takes centuries to put pen to paper to end conflicts. Now go watch Why Is There a US Military Base in Italy? Or click this other video instead.